Leave. You're a burden now. That's what my daughter said to me the day I told her I had cancer. Not a pause. Not a single flicker of worry on her face. Just those 7 words, sharp and clean, like a blade through bone. I stood in her kitchen, holding the test results in my trembling hands. The air smelled like cinnamon and bleach. She'd just finished cleaning, and apparently there was no room in her perfect world for a mother with a diagnosis. Natalie, I didn't come here for help. I thought you should know. Her eyes didn't soften. If anything, they narrowed. So you're not dying tomorrow, right? Then don't dump your drama on me. She turned away, brushing invisible crumbs off the counter. In that moment, my legs barely held me up. I stared at the photo on her fridge. Natalie, her husband Greg, and my grandson Aiden at the beach last summer. I wasn't in it. I had taken the picture. I took many pictures, paid for most of the vacations too. But somehow, I had disappeared from the frame long before this moment. I opened my mouth to speak, but all that came out was a shaky breath. If you've ever been disrespected by someone you love, this story will speak to your heart. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the test results folded neatly beside my teacup like a cruel invitation I hadn't asked for. The house was too quiet. No footsteps upstairs, no grandchild's voice echoing through the walls. Just the hum of the old fridge and the clock that seemed louder than ever before. I kept glancing at the phone. No calls, no texts. Natalie didn't even check if I got home safe. I had raised her in this very house, painted her room yellow when she was 6, held her through heartbreaks, stayed up during chickenpox, prom nights, and the time she failed her first college exam. I was the one who told her she'd make it when even she didn't believe she would. And now I was a burden. I reached for my teacup, but my hand trembled too much. I sat back, stared at the chipped edge of the cup, and let the silence fall again. On the wall hung a photo of my late husband, Robert. Taken in 1983, our first picnic as a family. Natalie's just a toddler in his arms, grinning with watermelon smeared across her cheeks. He used to say, "One day she'll take care of you like you took care of her." That photo became my anchor, my reminder, my symbol. But tonight, it felt more like a lie. The next morning, I found myself writing a grocery list out of habit. Not because I had an appetite, the diagnosis had stolen that, but because old routines cling to us, even when nothing else does. Milk, eggs, bread, cough drops. I paused. Then I added, peach jam. Aiden likes it. My hand froze on the page. Aiden, my grandson who used to curl up beside me on movie nights, ask me why clouds moved and whisper, "You're my best grandma." Now I hadn't seen him in 3 weeks. Natalie said he was too busy. He was 8. I folded the list in half and tucked it into my purse, even though I knew I wouldn't go to the store. Not today. Instead, I walked to the small shelf near the window. My memory shelf. There, under a ceramic angel, lay a bundle of old letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Natalie's childhood drawings, crayon scribbles of houses, hearts, and me. "Mommy, you're the best." One drawing had a shaky little figure with curly hair. Grandma, holding hands with a stick figure Natalie and a tiny baby. The same hands that once drew that now pushed me away. I ran my finger over the paper's edge, soft from time and oil. My throat tightened, and I sank slowly into the armchair beside the shelf. There was a knock on the door, gentle but clear. For a moment I hoped it was Natalie. It wasn't. It was Mabel, my neighbor from across the street. She stood there holding a small pot of soup, her cheeks pink from the October wind. "I saw your porch light on all night. Thought you could use something warm." She didn't ask questions. Just walked in like she used to years ago, when our kids were still riding bikes on the sidewalk and shouting across lawns. I set the soup down carefully. "Thank you, Mabel. I got some news." She looked at me. Really looked. "It's not your heart again, is it?" I shook my head. Cancer, ovarian. She didn't gasp, just reached over and held my hand. No fuss, no pity, just warmth. And that did more for me than Natalie's words ever could have. I told her yesterday, I whispered. Natalie. She said I was a burden. Mabel's mouth tightened, but she didn't speak. Her silence was its own kind of justice. She told me to leave, I added, as if I'd asked for anything. You didn't deserve that, Mabel said finally, quiet but firm. You gave that girl everything. We sat in silence, broken only by the ticking clock and the occasional clink of her spoon against the bowl. I don't want to tell Aiden, I said after a while. Not yet. He's just a child. Mabel nodded. But he's yours. He'll see what others don't. That line stayed with me long after she left. Maybe Aiden would see. Maybe. 2 days later, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope with stars drawn across the front. Thick blue marker, wild strokes like a child's joy refusing to stay inside the lines. No return address, just one word in the corner. Grandma. My hands trembled. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a drawing like the ones Natalie used to make. This one was simpler, rougher. A house with a garden, a stick figure with curly hair standing in front, and a speech bubble. I miss you. Below it, in careful, crooked letters, I love you, Grandma. I'm sorry Mom is mean. I had to sit down. Tears blurred the colors, but I didn't care. My fingers pressed the paper to my chest as if I could hug him through it. So he remembered me, still thought of me, still felt love, even if it had to come secretly. I could picture him slipping the envelope into the mailbox without Natalie noticing, maybe with Greg's help or maybe all on his own. That small act of resistance, that small act of love, cracked something open in me. I placed the drawing beside the old crayon one from years ago. They didn't match in style or age, but the love was the same. That night I lit a candle near the window. A quiet message in return. I miss you too, Aiden. Dr. Kessler's office always smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, an odd attempt to make grief smell softer. He spoke gently, the way doctors do when the news has already settled like dust. We're still in early stages, Helen, but it's aggressive. We'll need to move quickly. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I heard every word. My mind wandered to Natalie's kitchen again, her perfectly folded towels, her eyes that didn't flinch. What are my chances? I asked, steady. He paused. With treatment, good odds, but you'll need support, someone to drive you, help you rest, you'll be tired. Support. The word felt hollow. Do you have family nearby? He asked. I gave a small smile. I used to. He didn't push. Instead, he handed me a folder of information. Pamphlets, schedules, a map to the treatment center. But all I saw was a calendar I didn't want to fill. Back home, I laid the folder on the kitchen table beside Aiden's drawing. The contrast nearly broke me. In one, there was life and color. In the other, appointments and pills. I stared at the calendar, then crossed out Natalie's birthday. Just a single line through the square. Not out of anger, out of clarity. This was no longer her story. It was mine now. That night I dialed Natalie's number. Not because I expected kindness, but because a part of me, foolish and motherly, still hoped. The phone rang. Once, twice, 4 times. Then her voice. You've reached Natalie. Leave it. Beep. I hesitated, then spoke. Natalie, it's me. I just wanted to say I'm starting treatment next Monday. They say I'll need help, maybe with rides or... I stopped myself. Why was I asking again? I cleared my throat. Never mind. I'll manage. I just wanted you to know. Click. I didn't leave my number. She had it. I sat at the kitchen table again, the same place I had told her about the diagnosis. The same place she'd called me a burden. And yet here I was, reaching out like a fool with a scraped knee, hoping the hand that pushed me would suddenly become gentle. I stared at the silence, as if it might turn into an answer. It didn't. Instead, I stood and walked to the drawer where I kept my late husband's Bible. Inside, still tucked between Psalms and Proverbs, was the brass key to the old cabin up north, the one we hadn't visited in years. Robert's handwriting on the tag, for peace, when needed. Maybe it was time. I slipped the key into my pocket and whispered, I won't beg again. 3 days later, I packed a small suitcase and drove to the cabin. The leaves were gold and fire red, fluttering like memories on the long road north. I hadn't been here since Robert passed. I couldn't bear the stillness, but now I craved it. The key turned with some resistance, the lock stiff from years untouched. Inside, the air was stale, faintly damp, but the structure held strong, like my bones, tired but not broken. I opened the shutters and let the late autumn light spill in. Dust danced in the sunbeams, soft and weightless. There was an old quilt folded on the armchair. I pulled it over my shoulders and sat down, alone but not lonely. For once, the silence didn't feel like rejection. It felt earned. I placed Aiden's drawing on the mantel above the cold fireplace. His little stick figure smile was now my only company, and strangely, it was enough. That night I lit a fire with shaking hands. The flames cracked gently like a lullaby only the woods could hear. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't in pain, but because there was a different kind of peace settling in, a quiet that didn't demand anything from me. I whispered to the dark, I am not a burden. The woods said nothing, but they didn't need to. The next morning, frost covered the cabin windows like lace. Delicate, intricate, cold. I wrapped myself in Robert's flannel and stepped outside with a mug of weak coffee. The air stung my lungs, but it cleared my head more than any medicine ever had. That's when I saw them, footprints, small ones, not deep but fresh, right there in the frost-covered path leading from the woods. My heart skipped. Could it be Aiden? No. Too soon, too far. Natalie wouldn't bring him here, not even for a goodbye. Still I followed them, each step crunching beneath my feet. They led to the old swing Robert had hung decades ago, a thick rope and wooden plank beneath the pine. It swayed slightly, though no one sat on it. Just wind, probably. I touched the rope, rough and worn, and felt something pull in my chest. Memory. Natalie had swung there too, squealing with joy while Robert pushed her higher and higher. "To the sky, Daddy!" she used to shout. Funny how children dream of flying, and then one day they tell you to disappear. I stayed there a while, my fingers curled around the rope, my breath visible in the cold air. No one else appeared. Maybe the prints were old, maybe they were nothing, but they reminded me I wasn't invisible. Even the earth remembered where I walked. Even frost could hold a trace of someone who once mattered. That afternoon, with the fire cracking low and steady, I sat at the small wooden desk by the window and took out a sheet of paper. Not a hospital form, not a grocery list, just a letter. To Natalie, I wrote, pausing. The words didn't come easily. Not out of anger. I had spent that already. What remained now was something quieter, something sadder. I remember the night you had that fever at age 6. You kept calling for me even in your sleep. I stayed up all night, wiping your forehead, whispering, "I'm here, baby." My hand shook as I wrote. I gave everything I had to you, not for thanks, but because I loved being your mother. I folded the letter halfway, staring at the half-written truth. But now I see the space where your heart used to be when you looked at me. I don't blame you for your silence. Not anymore. I just don't belong in your world. And that's all right. I placed the pen down, exhausted. I didn't sign it. I didn't put it in an envelope. Instead, I placed the letter into the fireplace and watched it curl and blacken. Some things are meant to be said only once. Some truths only the flames can carry. As the ashes lifted, I felt something release inside me. Not hope, not yet, but space. 3 days passed in the rhythm of wood smoke and silence. Then on a gray Thursday morning, I heard a car engine crunch up the gravel drive. I froze. The kettle whistled behind me, but I didn't move to turn it off. My heart was already boiling. When the knock came, it wasn't hesitant. 2 short, firm raps. I opened the door. Greg stood there, Natalie's husband, holding a paper bag and looking like he hadn't slept. "Mrs. Prescott," he said, voice low. I heard you were here." I frowned. "How did you—" "Aiden told me," he said quickly. "He saw the old picture of the cabin on your fridge. Said you used to go here when you needed peace." For a moment I couldn't breathe. Aiden remembered. That word, peace. It wasn't random. He must have seen Robert's key once, years ago. Greg cleared his throat. "He misses you. He talks about you every night before bed." The words struck deep, both comfort and wound. "He sent you that drawing, didn't he?" I asked softly. Greg nodded. "Natalie doesn't know. She's been angry at everything lately. I don't know how to fix it." He placed the paper bag on the table. "Homemade soup, bread, apples. I just wanted to make sure you weren't alone," he said. I smiled faintly, holding back tears. "I've been alone before, Greg. This time it feels different." He looked at me with quiet guilt. "I'll tell him you're safe," he said. After Greg left, I sat on the porch, wrapped in the old quilt, its corners frayed from years of use and years of memory. The wind had picked up. Leaves scraped against the deck like whispers. Familiar, almost comforting. I clutched the mug in my hands and thought about what Greg said. She's been angry at everything lately. I wondered what that even meant. What had twisted Natalie so tightly that her own mother's illness became an inconvenience? What part of her heart had hardened? I traced the edge of the quilt absently. My mother had stitched it during my first pregnancy. A patch for every season, every fear. A mother's warmth should always be close, she'd said. I thought I understood those words when I became a mother. Now I realized I never truly did. Natalie never saw this quilt again after she left for college. She hadn't needed it, or maybe she never wanted to feel where she came from. I looked out at the trees, their branches bare now. A question I had been avoiding crept in like a draft beneath the door. Had I failed her? Not in the dinners or the school plays or the countless rides to swim practice, but in some invisible way. Had I not protected her enough from whatever bitterness had grown? The fire inside had gone to embers. I held the quilt tighter. "I gave her everything," I whispered, not to justify, just to remember. That night I dreamt of Natalie as a child. She was running barefoot through the cabin yard, hair wild, cheeks flushed with laughter. She held a paper crown in one hand and called out, "Mama, look, I'm the queen of everything." I remembered that day. She had made the crown herself. Glue smeared on her fingers, sequins crooked but shining. In the dream, I clapped and called back, "Long live the queen!" But then the image faded. She turned to me, her eyes older now. Cold. The crown slipped from her hand. "You don't belong in my world," she said in that same voice she used last week. I woke up shivering. The fire had burned low again, shadows dancing on the walls. I sat up and pulled the quilt around me. The silence in the cabin wasn't peaceful tonight. It was thick, like breath held too long. Her words, real or dreamt, echoed in my chest. "You don't belong in my world." I rose and lit the lamp by the window. Not for light, for presence. And then, as if summoned by the weight of everything unsaid, the wind picked up and carried a sound, faint, maybe imagined. It sounded like her voice. I stepped outside, heart tight. No one was there, just the wind stirring the pines. But I whispered anyway. "I belonged in your world before you even had one." The wind didn't answer, but I knew the truth now, and I said it aloud. The next morning I wandered the cabin, opening drawers I hadn't touched in years. Most were filled with old linens, faded maps, or nothing at all. But in Robert's bookshelf, second row, far left, I found something unexpected. Tucked inside a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, a note in his handwriting. Don't let bitterness take root, Helen. Let her find her way. Love doesn't disappear. It just gets quiet when it's scared. I sat down, the book open on my lap, the note fluttering like a second heartbeat. He must have written it during one of Natalie's teenage storms, back when slamming doors and cutting words were her way of building walls. I had cried in this cabin then too, but I'd also believed she'd come back to me. Back then, she always did. Now I wasn't sure. I read the note again. Let her find her way. Had I done that? Or had I waited too long? Too hurt, too tired to keep holding the light? I folded the note and pressed it against my chest. Robert had always believed in the quiet return of love. But what if this time, love never returned? I looked out the window, where frost painted the trees silver. Still, I left the book open on the table. Some messages aren't meant to be put away. It arrived quietly, slipped under the cabin door like a draft. I found it just after sunrise. Pale envelope, no name, no handwriting, just sealed with a single strip of tape. My heart picked up. My name wasn't on it, but somehow I knew it was for me. I opened it slowly. Inside was a drawing, crayon on white paper. Aiden again. This time the stick figure Grandma was holding hands with two people, a small boy and a taller figure with a brown scribble of hair. In the corner he'd written, "We miss you. Mom is just sad." No punctuation, just the honesty of a child. And then, "Can I come see the cabin sometime?" I covered my mouth. It was as if he had peeked into my dreams and answered them. How had he gotten it here? Had Greg driven all the way again? Had Aiden begged? There was no second page, no adult explanation, just that drawing and that question. I sat on the floor beside the door, paper in hand, knees pulled to my chest. Sad. That's what he'd said about Natalie. Not cruel, not angry, just sad. It didn't excuse anything, but it shifted something in me, like a door cracking open an inch. Sometimes pain wears a mask that even the person can't recognize. I didn't cry, but I whispered something to the boy who wasn't there yet. "Yes, sweetheart, you can come." That afternoon I did something I hadn't done in years. I brought the old quilt outside. I shook it out gently, then laid it over the wooden swing Robert built. It was too cold to sit long, but something about placing it there felt right, like an invitation, like a memory laid out in the open. I sat on the steps and watched it sway. The wind caught one corner, lifting it just enough to make it look like someone had just left or was about to arrive. That swing had held generations. Robert's steady hands had pushed Natalie on it until his back gave out. I had once held Aiden in my lap there while telling him stories about the stars. And now? Now it held nothing but time. But maybe that was enough for today. I stayed there for nearly an hour, letting the cold settle into my bones. Not to punish them, but to feel something real, something present. When I finally stood, I didn't fold the quilt. I left it there, gently, as if someone might need it soon. Hope isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a piece of fabric waiting in the wind. That night, I lit the fire early and stared at the door longer than usual, not in desperation, in readiness. The phone rang while I was washing the dishes. A rare thing, given that only Mabel and the clinic ever called me now. I let it ring once, twice, then rushed to dry my hands. By the time I reached it, the line had gone silent, no message. I checked the number. It wasn't one I recognized, but the area code was from home, Natalie's town. I stood there for a long time, the dripping sponge forgotten in the sink. Was it her? I didn't dare call back. Something about this new phase of my life, the quiet strength, the separation, made me wary of chasing. I had spent years chasing her approval, her love, her attention. Now I waited differently. The phone sat silent for the rest of the evening, as if unsure whether to ring again or let things lie. I went to the bookshelf and took out Robert's Bible, the key still tucked inside. I held it in my palm, heavy with meaning. I didn't need her to call, but part of me, the part that still heard her childhood laughter, wanted her to. Just once, I placed the key on the mantel beside Aiden's drawing. This house held more truth now than any phone call could. Still, when the wind moved through the chimney later that night, it sounded like a sigh. And I wondered whose it was. The snow came overnight. When I woke and pulled aside the curtain, the world had been softened, blanketed in white, as if all the harsh lines had been erased. The trees bowed gently under its weight. The swing out back had a thick layer across the quilt, untouched, pristine. I made tea and sat by the window, wrapped in my shawl. There was something holy about fresh snow, the way it quiets even the noisiest thoughts. I thought about Aiden. Would he love it here? Would he make snow angels, beg for hot cocoa, come running in with red cheeks and icy fingers? I thought about Natalie, too. Not the woman she was last week, but the girl she once had been. The one who built snowmen with crooked hats. The one who asked, "Will you love me forever, even when I'm old?" Yes, forever, I'd said. The kind of promise a mother makes before she knows what forever really costs. I stood and walked out into the yard, boots crunching against the new snow. I brushed the quilt off with my bare hands. My fingers stung from the cold, but it felt good to touch something real. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I laid down in the snow and made a snow angel. The sky above was gray, but I smiled, not for anyone to see, just for me. 3 days later, Mabel called. Her voice was tight, almost hesitant. "Helen, I wasn't sure if you'd want to know, but Greg's mother passed. The funeral was today." I blinked. No one had told me. Natalie hadn't called. I sat down slowly, the silence in the cabin pressing close. I had known Greg's mother for over 2 decades. We used to bake together for school fundraisers. She held my hand when Robert died. She was for a time family. And yet, I was left out. No black dress, no shared memories, no place among them anymore. "Did Natalie speak?" I asked. "Yes," Mabel said. "Aiden told me she cried, but she didn't mention you." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Not mentioned. Not even my name in passing. It wasn't just distance anymore. It was erasure. Mabel's voice softened. "I'm sorry, Helen. You deserved better." After we hung up, I stood by the fire for a long time. Then I walked outside in my coat and boots, climbed the short hill behind the cabin, and stood beneath the old pine. The cold bit into my cheeks, but I didn't move. I whispered nothing. There were no prayers, no tears, just a stillness, like grief standing up straight instead of falling apart. That night I left the porch light on, not in mourning, but in defiance. Even if they shut me out, I would still shine. 2 days after the funeral, I dreamt I was at Natalie's table. A long, polished oak table I had helped pay for when she first moved into that big suburban house. She said she wanted one big enough for all the holidays, for laughter, for stories. But in the dream, no one spoke. Natalie sat at one end, sipping wine. Greg beside her, staring straight ahead. Aiden fidgeting, eyes darting toward the empty chair at the far end. My chair. I was there, but not really. I was standing in the corner unseen, like a coat no one claimed. Natalie raised her glass and said, "To those who belong." Aiden looked at me then, or rather at the space I should have filled. His lips moved, but I couldn't hear the words. I woke with a start. The cabin was still dark, the fire low. Only the faint ticking of the clock reminded me time hadn't stopped. I sat at the table, alone. Just me, a cold teacup, and a memory that hadn't even happened. I wasn't afraid of dying. Not anymore. But I was afraid of being forgotten, of being turned into nothing more than an absence, I picked up the notebook I'd left near the window and began to write. Not to Natalie, to Aiden. I want you to remember my voice. Not for what I said, but for how it sounded when I loved you. I underlined the last part, twice. The snow had begun to melt when I heard another knock. Mid-morning. I was still in my robe, hair tied back, Robert's mug in my hand. At first, I thought it might be Mabel again, or Greg, maybe bringing another quiet gesture in a paper bag. But it wasn't. It was a woman I didn't recognize. Late 30s, dark coat, nervous smile. Mrs. Prescott. I nodded, cautious. I'm Miriam. I work with Greg at the school. He mentioned you were up here alone. My stomach tightened. Is something wrong? No, she said quickly. I hope this isn't intrusive, but Aiden gave me something to bring you. He said it was a secret delivery for Grandma. She handed me a small box, wrapped in brown paper, tied with green yarn, sloppy, rushed. I took it slowly. He made me promise not to tell his mom, Miriam added. He said you'd understand. She didn't stay long. Just gave me a soft smile and left as quietly as she came. Inside the box, nestled in tissue paper, was a small flashlight. The plastic kind children keep under pillows for reading. On the side, written in crooked Sharpie letters. In case it gets too dark, I sat on the floor and cried. Not from sadness, but from the simple, overwhelming fact that someone still thought of me in the dark. He was still my light, and I was still his. That night I placed the little flashlight beside my bed. I didn't need it. The cabin had plenty of lamps, but it stayed on anyway. A small circle of light on the quilt, a gentle reminder that someone had reached across the silence just for me. I lay there listening to the wind rustle the trees. It no longer sounded lonely. It sounded like breath. I didn't sleep much. Instead, I sat up with my journal, writing softly in the dark. To the woman I raised, I began. I don't know when you turned away. I only know that when I needed you most, your back was the only part I saw. I paused, but I didn't cross it out. I have decided not to chase your love anymore. Not because I stopped loving you, but because love shouldn't crawl. I closed the journal, and then I did something strange. I smiled. Not because everything was okay, but because, somehow, I felt okay. Aiden had sent me light. Robert had left me wisdom. And I still had breath in my lungs and warmth in my chest. The kind that didn't depend on anyone else's table or invitation or memory. I clicked the flashlight off. Then I turned on the lamp beside me, a gentle golden glow that bathed the cabin walls, and I left it on all night, just because I could. The next afternoon, the phone rang again. I let it ring twice before picking up, not out of defiance, but preparation. Hello? There was a pause. Then, Mom? Her voice, Natalie. It sounded smaller than I remembered. Not sharp, not cold, just tired. I didn't answer right away. Let the silence stretch, not as punishment, but because it needed to mean something. I heard Greg came up there, she said. And that Aiden's been writing. Still, I said nothing. I didn't tell him to. I didn't even know until yesterday. He showed me the flashlight. A breath, a pause, a confession hanging between us. I haven't been kind to you, she said. I've been angry, not at you, at everything, but I took it out on you. Another silence. I don't know what's wrong with me. I closed my eyes. I don't either, I said quietly. But I know what's wrong with me. I have cancer, Natalie, and I've been walking through it alone. She didn't cry, not then, but her voice cracked. I know, I'm sorry. I sat down at the table, hand shaking slightly. I don't need your pity, I said. I don't even know if I need your apology. She exhaled. But I miss you, she whispered. I let the weight of those words settle. I miss you too, I said. And for the first time in months, the line between us didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a bridge. 2 days later, I heard a car pull into the gravel drive. I didn't rush to the window. I waited. If it was another package, another quiet kindness, I would receive it with grace. If it was Natalie, well, some wounds needed to walk through the door on their own. When I finally opened it, she was standing there. No makeup, no suitcase. Just her, a scarf around her neck, eyes red-rimmed, Aiden's flashlight clutched in her hand. "I didn't bring anything," she said. "Didn't know if you wanted me to stay." I stepped aside. She entered slowly, like someone afraid to break what was already fragile. In the living room, she paused at the quilt on the chair, ran her fingers over it. "I remember this," she said. So did I. We didn't talk much that afternoon. I made tea. She sat quietly, staring at the fire. Then, without a word, we went outside. The snow had mostly melted now, just thin patches here and there. She walked toward the swing, paused, then sat. I followed and sat beside her. It creaked gently under our weight, but held. We didn't swing, we didn't speak. We just sat there, shoulder to shoulder. She reached over and placed the flashlight between us on the quilt. "I was scared," she said. "I still am," I replied. But we stayed. Together. That night she helped me stoke the fire. No grand gestures, no long speeches, just the quiet rhythm of a daughter trying, clumsily, haltingly, to come back to her mother. After we cleaned the dishes, she stood by the window, watching the trees sway in the dark. "I don't know how to be better," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if afraid the truth might echo too loudly. I sat at the table, Robert's Bible in my lap. "You don't have to be better," I said. "You just have to be here." She turned to me then, and for the first time in what felt like years, her eyes held something fragile. Not guilt, not pride, just the smallest flicker of need. She walked over and knelt beside my chair. Not in submission, not in shame, but in a gesture that said more than any words could. She rested her head against my knee. "I'm sorry, Mama." I ran my fingers through her hair like I had when she was a child. It was still soft in places. We stayed like that, her on the floor, me in the chair, as the fire hummed behind us. The house didn't feel empty anymore. No promises were made, no forgiveness demanded, just presence. And in that moment, I realized something simple and true. Love doesn't vanish. It waits. The next morning, I woke early. Natalie was still asleep on the sofa, curled beneath the quilt her grandmother stitched. Her face was softer in sleep, the kind of softness that reminded me of lullabies and late-night feedings. I didn't wake her. Instead, I walked to the bedroom and opened the drawer in Robert's old writing desk. The bottom one, the one I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a diary. My own. Leather-bound, edges frayed, pages filled with words I hadn't dared share. I brought it to the kitchen table and opened to a page from 15 years ago. "Natalie yelled again today, said I ruin everything." I smiled and made dinner anyway. "I'm afraid if I ever stop pretending, she'll leave and never come back." I ran my fingers over the ink, faded now, but not forgotten. So much pretending, so many silent sacrifices, all tucked into paper because I couldn't speak them aloud. Natalie stirred in the next room. I heard her footsteps, slow, uncertain. I closed the diary but didn't hide it. When she entered the kitchen, eyes still puffy with sleep, I slid it across the table. "You should read this. Not now, but sometime." She looked at me, hesitant. "What is it?" "It's the truth I lived while you were learning how to leave." Her eyes filled again. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I know," I said gently. "That's why it hurt." Later that day, as Natalie sat by the window reading the diary, head bowed, fingers trembling, I went to the hallway closet and pulled down an old box. Not labeled. I knew what was inside. Photos. Most of them faded, some bent at the corners, but all of them moments. Truths, frozen in color. I carried the box to the living room and began sorting through them on the rug. Natalie looked up. "I remember these," she said quietly. "You always had a camera." I smiled faintly. "Yes, I thought if I captured enough, maybe we'd remember better. She reached for one. Robert holding baby Natalie, both of them laughing in the yard, and then another. A photo of me, holding Natalie's tiny hand on her first day of school. I looked younger, tired, yes, but proud, so proud. She studied it for a long time. Then I found the one I had been searching for. It wasn't posed. Just a moment I caught one summer evening. Aiden asleep on my lap, Natalie beside me, her head leaning on my shoulder. A moment before the coldness, before the silence. I handed it to her. Aiden's never seen this one, I said. She stared at it for a long while, then pressed it to her chest like it might mend something inside. Can I take it to him? She asked. I nodded. Tell him, I said softly, that he was always loved, even in the spaces we forgot to fill. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines and painted the cabin in long golden shadows, a knock came again. It was the mail carrier, bundled in a navy coat, cheeks wind-burned. Special delivery, he said, handing me a white envelope. Signature required. I signed without reading the return address. Inside, a letter from my lawyer. I sat on the porch swing, Natalie beside me now, watching the light fade. She didn't speak. She'd learned not to fill silence with apologies. I opened the envelope. The letter was clear. My small estate, the house in town, modest savings, and this cabin was all still in my name, but a formal request had been filed a few weeks earlier by Natalie, a petition for guardianship. She'd tried to take legal control. I didn't know, she said instantly, her voice sharp with shame. Greg told me about this months ago. He said it was just in case. I didn't follow up, I swear. I believed her, but the wound still pulsed. You called me a burden, Natalie, I said. And then you tried to own what little piece I had left. Tears welled in her eyes. I was afraid, she whispered, that you'd disappear, that I'd be left with guilt and no way back. I folded the letter and set it on the table beside us. You don't control someone by saving them, I said gently. You save them by seeing them. She nodded, quiet. The swing creaked beneath us, steady, like the truth between us. That night, after Natalie went to bed early, emotionally worn, her spirit quiet, I found myself in the tiny bathroom brushing my teeth with an old plastic brush I'd kept in a drawer for years. The mirror above the sink was spotted, cracked slightly at the edge, but it held my reflection. I looked at myself. Really looked. The lines were deeper, the eyes more tired, my once thick hair now thinner, grayer. A woman with illness in her bones and history in her face. But beneath that, something else. Resolve. There was a time I feared growing old, feared becoming invisible, unwanted, feared that one day my own daughter would look at me and see nothing but weight, not worth. And yet, here I stood. Still here. Still me. I touched the glass lightly, fingertips meeting their ghost. You are not what they called you, I whispered. You are more. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long, long time. I smiled at my reflection, not to pretend, not to defy, just to acknowledge her. The woman who stayed soft, the woman who stayed strong. Behind me, the hallway light flicked on. Natalie's voice, low and tentative. Mom? I turned. She held a blanket and 2 mugs of tea. I couldn't sleep. I nodded, stepped aside, and together we sat in the living room. 2 women side by side, no longer afraid of the quiet between them. At midnight, after tea had cooled and our voices had settled into soft hums of memory, not apology, just remembering, I stood and lit a single candle. Natalie watched me from the armchair, wrapped in the old quilt, her face illuminated by flickers of gold. I placed the candle on the windowsill. For what? She asked softly. For the ones who are still finding their way home, I said. She nodded, eyes glistening. I didn't explain further. She didn't need me to. Outside, the frost had crept back in, the earth shimmering under moonlight, silent and waiting. The swing in the yard barely moved, but its shadow danced long across the snow. Natalie walked over and stood beside me. She placed her hand on mine. "Was I always like this?" she asked. "No," I said, "but pain makes people forget how to be soft." "And you?" she asked. "I remembered," I whispered. "Even when it hurt." She bowed her head. Then she whispered, "Thank you for not turning away." I squeezed her hand gently. "I did," I said, "for a while, but only to protect what was left." The candle flame wavered but did not go out. We watched it for a long time. Two women who had known both distance and devotion. Outside, no one passed. No cars, no footsteps. But the light stayed on, and in some quiet, sacred way, we both knew it wasn't just for us. 3 mornings later, just as the frost began to loosen its grip on the earth, a car door slammed outside. I looked up from the stove. Natalie was already at the window. She didn't say anything, just smiled, eyes filling before she even opened the door. "Aiden." He ran toward the cabin, his coat open, cheeks pink with cold and excitement. "Grandma!" he shouted. I dropped the spoon. By the time I stepped onto the porch, he was already in my arms. He smelled of cinnamon and winter air, and he hugged me the way only children do, completely, with nothing held back. "I missed you," he mumbled against my neck. "I know, baby," I whispered. "I missed you too." Behind him, Greg stood beside the car, nodding. I met his gaze and nodded back. No words were needed. Inside, Aiden immediately spotted his drawing still on the mantel. "You kept it." "Of course I did," I said, placing my hand over my heart. "It's my favorite thing in the whole house." He grinned, then pulled something from his coat pocket, a small plastic snow globe. "It's not real snow," he said, "but it's from me." I took it with both hands. "I'll treasure it like it is," I said. That afternoon, the cabin sounded different. Laughter returned. Footsteps ran down the hall, and the silence that once weighed down the walls, gone. Just like that. That night, after Aiden had fallen asleep beneath the quilt, his little hand curled around the flashlight he once mailed me, Natalie and I sat at the kitchen table. No distractions, just tea and the kind of quiet that asks for honesty. I reached into the old Bible and pulled out Robert's brass key. She recognized it immediately. "The cabin," she said softly. I placed it on the table between us. "He left it for me when he died," I said. "Said it was for peace, when needed." She traced the worn edges with her finger. "You always loved this place more than the house." "No," I said. "I loved what this place reminded me of. Who I used to be before the noise of life made me doubt my worth." She looked at me then. Really looked. "You never stopped being that woman," she said. "I just forgot how to see her." My throat tightened. "And I forgot how to demand to be seen," I replied. We sat in that soft truth for a long while. Then I slid the key toward her. "For you," I said. "Someday, when you need peace." Her eyes widened. "Mom, no, not now, but later. When life gets loud again, when the world makes you forget who you are." She picked it up like it might break. "I don't deserve this." "No," I whispered, "but neither did I. And yet, I came here anyway." 2 days later, we returned to town. My first treatment was scheduled for Monday. The drive back was quiet, not somber, just full, like there were no more heavy silences left to carry. Natalie drove. Aiden sat in the back, humming to himself, flashlight still clutched like a talisman. The snow globe rested in my lap. At home, the house greeted me with a stillness that didn't hurt anymore. It was mine again, not a reminder of abandonment, but a place reclaimed. Later that week, I visited my lawyer. He asked if I still wanted to proceed with the changes to my will. I nodded. "Yes," I said, "but I want to add something." He raised an eyebrow. I handed him a note I'd written by hand, to be read aloud only when the will is opened. "To my daughter, Natalie, I forgive you. Not because you asked me to, but because I need the space where the anger used to live. I am leaving you what was once mine, not because you earned it, but because I believe you finally understand the cost of love. Take care of this home, and never forget that even when I was called a burden, I still carried you." The lawyer looked at me for a long moment. "You sure?" he asked gently. "I've never been surer," I said. Because justice, I had learned, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a whisper in a will that makes the whole room stop breathing. Spring arrived slowly. The last frost lifted and the earth, once rigid with silence, began to loosen. Birds returned. So did color. I stood at the edge of the garden behind the house, the one Robert used to tend with his bare hands, the one I had let go wild, until now. Natalie joined me with 2 spades and a paper bag full of seeds. She didn't speak, just handed me the smaller one. "I thought we could plant something together," she said. I nodded. We worked side by side, not in haste, but in rhythm, digging, placing, covering. The soil was cool, forgiving. Aiden played nearby, occasionally running over with a worm in his palm, delight on his face. "He's not scary, Grandma. He's helping the garden." I smiled. Every movement felt sacred, the kind of quiet ritual that doesn't erase pain, but grows through it. Natalie wiped her brow and looked at me. "Did you ever think we'd get back here?" I paused, brushing dirt from my palms. "No," I said honestly. But then again, most things that grow start in the dark. She nodded, tears close. At the edge of the bed, I planted the last thing, a single lily bulb, Robert's favorite, the same kind that bloomed the year we were married. When we finished, we sat back on our heels, covered in earth and memory, and I realized this wasn't about returning to what we were. It was about planting something new, together. A week later, I returned to Natalie's house. This time, not as an afterthought. She opened the door before I even knocked. Aiden barreled into my legs, wrapping his arms around me with the ease of someone who no longer feared I'd disappear. Inside, the house felt warmer, not because of the heater, but because the coldness had left the corners. On the mantel, I saw something that stopped me, the photo, the one I had given her, of me, her, and Aiden on that summer evening long ago. It was framed now. I walked closer. Next to it sat the snow globe and the little plastic flashlight. A shrine almost, not to me, but to remembrance, to what was nearly lost. Natalie joined me, watching my reaction. "I wanted it there," she said softly, "so I wouldn't forget again." I touched the frame gently. "You closed the door on me once," I said, not accusing, just remembering. She nodded. "I did." I turned to face her. "But you opened it again." She didn't speak, just stepped forward and hugged me, not a tentative, polite embrace, but one that pressed every wound between us into healing. Behind us, Aiden whispered, "Mom cries happy now." I smiled, eyes full. The same door that once closed on me with shame and silence now opened with trembling hands. And on the other side of it, not forgiveness, but something even deeper. Recognition. The next morning I woke in a room I hadn't slept in for years. Natalie had prepared it quietly. No announcement, no drama. Just soft sheets, fresh curtains, and the quilt I had once made for her as a child folded neatly at the end of the bed. Everything about the room spoke one thing. I see you now. Sunlight filtered through the window, landing on a small dresser where a vase of lilies stood. Fresh, fragrant, white as winter's last whisper. I touched one gently. My chest tightened, not in pain, but in awe. On the nightstand was a note in Natalie's handwriting. "I don't expect you to forget. I just want the chance to honor what I forgot to remember." I sat on the edge of the bed, the note resting in my lap. It was strange how healing comes. Not as thunder, not as apology screamed through tears, but as a room made ready without asking. Later that day, As I made breakfast with Aidan tugging at my apron, Natalie passed by and smiled. "Did you sleep okay?" "Yes," I said. But what I meant was more than that. I had slept in peace, in a room that no longer held echoes of pain, only the soft, brave hum of repair. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't dared believe until now. I was wanted here. Not needed, not tolerated, wanted. That afternoon, I opened the small drawer in the room Natalie had prepared. Inside, nestled in a velvet pouch I hadn't seen in decades, was my mother's necklace, a delicate gold chain with a single pearl. I'd given it to Natalie the day she turned 18. She hadn't worn it in years. And yet, here it was. Returned to my drawer without a word. I lifted it gently. The pearl still caught the light the way it used to. Soft, not showy. Dignified. Natalie came in behind me, pausing in the doorway when she saw it in my hand. "I wasn't sure if I had the right to keep it anymore," she said. I looked at her, heart tender. "That necklace was never about ownership," I said. "It was about remembering the women who came before you, and the strength they carried." She looked down. "I didn't carry it well." "No," I said softly, "but maybe now you will." I walked over and placed it in her palm. Her fingers closed around it carefully as if afraid it might break. "It's yours again," I said. "Not because you deserve it, but because you're choosing differently." Her eyes filled, and I watched as she clasped it around her neck, not as a decoration, but as a symbol. A circle, closing, a lineage, remembered, a burden, lifted. Monday came. Natalie insisted on driving me to the clinic. The road was quiet, the trees beginning to blush with early spring, buds shyly appearing, as if unsure whether it was safe to bloom again. We didn't speak much, but there was no tension, only presence. At the clinic, Natalie held my coat while I filled out the forms. She sat beside me, not scrolling on her phone, not distracted, just there. When the nurse called my name, I stood, exhaled, and turned to Natalie. "You don't have to come in." She met my eyes. "I want to." So we walked in together. The doctor explained everything gently. The treatment plan, the risks, the fatigue I should expect. I nodded, taking it in. Natalie asked questions I hadn't thought to ask. She held my hand through it all. Afterward, we sat outside on a bench, coffee cups in hand. "You're brave," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm practiced." She frowned slightly. "I've had to be brave for so long. It's no longer courage. It's habit." She reached over and placed her hand on mine. "Then let me be brave for you now." I didn't answer, but I didn't pull away either. As we sat there, two women with a shared silence, I realized the circle hadn't just closed. It had opened again, wider, stronger, ready. That evening back home, I lit the lamp in the living room. Not out of necessity, out of intention. Aidan was already asleep, curled beside the dog-eared book we'd read together. A story about a fox who found his way home after being forgotten. Natalie came downstairs in her robe, holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She handed me one and sat beside me on the couch, quiet. We didn't talk about the treatment, not tonight. Instead, we watched the lamp. Its soft, golden light reached every corner of the room. No shadows, no secrets, just warmth. "I used to think silence meant distance," she said. "It can," I replied, "but sometimes it means respect." We sipped our tea. The old house creaked the way it always had. Not as a warning, but as a memory. "Will you come back to the cabin this summer?" she asked. "If there's peace to be found there," I said, smiling. She reached for my hand, held it gently. "There is," she whispered. "There always was. I just didn't know how to see it." The lamp flickered once. A soft pulse, like breath. Then it glowed steady. Outside, the wind rustled the garden where new life had already begun pushing up through the thawed soil. Inside, the lamp stayed on. All night. No one turned it off. No one needed to. By June, the garden had bloomed. The lilies opened first, tall, elegant, just like Robert always liked. Then came the daisies, stubborn and cheerful, spreading themselves across the earth like laughter. Natalie knelt by the soil with Aidan beside her, both of them covered in flecks of dirt and sunlight. I watched from the porch, a book in my lap, the breeze lifting the hem of my skirt. There was no drama now, just life. Aidan ran to me with a tulip in his hand. "For you, Grandma," he said, beaming. "It's the first one." I tucked it behind my ear. "Then I'll wear it proudly." Natalie looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. "We should plant more for next year," she said. "We will," I replied, "every year." The earth, once hard and frozen, had remembered how to soften. So had we. As evening came, the sky turned the color of old rose petals. I lit the porch lamp again, a quiet ritual now. Not because I needed to be found, but because I wanted to be visible. The light wasn't just for me. It was for anyone still lost in the dark. Anyone who needed to know that dignity can survive betrayal, that love can grow back, that silence can heal, and that even the cruelest winter gives way to spring if we stay long enough to see it bloom. Do you believe family can heal, even after deep betrayal?